Le doule, c'est le chapeau. Et le porteur de doule, c'est le doulos. Silien porte le doule, c'est-à-dire qu'aux yeux des gens du milieu, il en croque.
Je crois qu'on n'a plus rien à se dire, il est tard.
Attends, on a autre chose à te demander. Faut pas me confondre avec les gens qui rentrent dans votre bureau en marche arrière. J'en croque pas, moi.
Le doulos est un indicateur de police.
Passez-moi l'inspecteur Salignari.
Qui m'a balancé?
On le craint, on tente de ne pas le fréquenter.
Alors, c'est ça le fameux Silien?
Julien, t'as tout correct. C'est pas ce qu'on dit à Paris.
Le doulos jouit d'un statut particulier, tant dans le milieu qu'à la grande maison.
En somme, quand on ne vous aide pas, vous êtes perdu.
Ce n'est pas un hors-la-loi ordinaire, mais sa vie est plus dangereuse.
Dans ce métier, on finit toujours clochard. Ou avec quelques balles dans la peau.
Il faut que je trouve cette ordure de Silien.
J'ai peur.
Si tu me connaissais comme beaucoup me connaissent, tu n'aurais pas peur de rester avec moi.
Le doulos, une tragédie du mensonge. Le mystère à l'état pur. Un homme pris au piège. Le doulos, où vous ferez la connaissance de Silien, Maurice, Clin, Fabienne, Thérèse, Gilbert, Nutetchiou. Un film de Jean-Pierre Melville. Prochainement sur cet écran.
Hello, welcome to Movie Humpers. My name is Bob Sham.
I'm Angela.
And the sounds you hear may be dogs, and all month long it is the Left Hand Endeavor. That is noir. 5 days a week, every week. Noir. 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 And, you know, we could have pulled a bunch of that French New Wave into this month if we wanted to. The French named this genre. Like, at the time in the 40s, they weren't like, let's make a noir picture. Mm-mm. It was maybe called like a genre picture or a crime picture or a melodrama. That was used a lot. But I believe it was a French critic who actually officially coined the term film noir, classic noir, to describe those crime movies, especially the kind that come from the United States. And the movie we're talking about today is French.
The French.
By the godfather of the French New Wave of the time. Jean-Pierre Melville is the director. And I think we'll be revisiting him again later this year. But for now, this will be our first Jean-Pierre Melville. This is also the most recent, the youngest movie this month that we're talking about. It came out in 1962. It's the only movie we're discussing that is from the 60s. Let It Loose from 1962, directed by Jean-Pierre Melville and starring Jean-Paul Belmondo and Serge Reggiani. Those are our mains. That's Cillian and Maurice. And there are other people as well, which we could name. Therese is Monique Hennessy. Fabienne is Fabienne Dali. That's her actual name. And this movie, the Le Doulos, it'll tell you right at the beginning of the movie that Le Doulos,
the French,
means hat officially, but it's an underworld term that also means like a police informant. Like the one who wears the hat is the police informant. Like this movie, we had to really go back and kind of study this movie a bit because you're getting a lot of names thrown at you that are jumbled around, and a lot of big things seem to happen off screen, but then we revisit them later.
And talking a lot about people you haven't met yet, and then you meet them and go, wait a second.
Yeah.
Why? Who is that? What do I know about them?
We are being like handed a bag full of names, and then it's like we sit through the movie and be like, oh, that's who this person is. Mm-hmm. And at first, we're meeting a guy named Maurice, who is talking to a man named Gilbert. Mm-hmm. Gilbert. And we're I know the movie's about a police informant, so I'm sitting there assuming the whole time that Maurice is the informant. But he's sitting there talking to this guy And he's got like all these jewels, and they seem to be close. Like the jeweler, the fence, has been taking care of Maurice because he got out of prison not that long ago. And then
they knew each other before.
And then at one point, Maurice goes out of frame, and Gilbert turns around and pauses, and he gets shot up by Maurice.
Maurice borrowed Gilbert's gun to shoot him with.
Yeah.
And he found out, I think it's interesting because he says later that he might not have shot him if Gilbert hadn't turned around and seen him holding the gun. But he also knew that there were two people on their way there that Maurice did not like.
Yeah, yeah.
And he wanted to kill Gilbert, we'll find out later why, and then also take the jewels and the money. And he did. He took the jewels and the money and the gun, and he ran out of the house just as these two other men, Nateccio and someone else.
What is that fucker's name?
It starts with Nut. That's all I know. Oh, also, Maurice looks like a straight man, Mr. Bean.
Yeah, he does. Like if Mr. Bean smelled like cigarettes. Nateccio. That's one of the guys. Yeah, no one likes Nateccio.
Bad guy.
I mean, everyone here is kind of a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
So while he's dipping around town, he's burying his jewels, burying his money. He's got a buddy, though we only see them in like 2 scenes together in the whole movie. Mm-hmm. But it's this guy named Cillian, as played by Jean-Paul Belmondo.
Maurice is at his girlfriend Therese's house, and Cillian shows up, and Cillian is bringing him the tools to break into his safe because they have this big job they're going to do the next day. And that's what Maurice said he needed the gun for, even though, like you said, he hid the gun and all of that. So then his other friend Jean comes in, and so they all kind of know each other. And then Therese comes in, and there is this very odd moment between her and Cillian where they kind of regard each other oddly.
Yeah.
And she's kind of cold shoulder to him. And he tells this little story about, before she gets there, they tell this story about how Maurice got drunk a couple weeks ago and told them a bunch of stuff, like how Gilbert had killed his ex-girlfriend after he went to jail because she was an informant.
And that's why Maurice ultimately killed Gilbert. We're not too clear in the beginning. That's kind of how this works out. We're assuming things, or we see things happen and then we're told why later.
Because they don't truly explain it fully. Like, they say that he killed Arlette, but they don't fully explain who Arlette is, right? Arlette was Maurice's girl. So it's a little confusing. Yeah. She was a snitch.
Yeah.
Or Gilbert thought she was. Whether she was or not, that's why Gilbert apparently killed her.
Of course, she's dead and we don't get flashbacks, so.
Right. Cillian says this thing where he's like, yeah, I was in the other room, but I heard everything you guys were saying.
Yeah.
Then Maurice and Therese decide to have a conversation in the next room from Cillian.
Yeah.
He's already made clear that he has excellent hearing.
Yeah.
And they're whispering about how Maurice had her go watch a house all day, the house they're going to break into the next day, to make sure the people who live there are out of town. And she's like, yeah, they're out of town. This little old man is watching the house. There's a poodle. I called and asked for the couple. The couple's on vacation. Then, Cillian leaves and she makes this comment about, why does he even trust Cillian? Cillian is so untrustworthy. Why doesn't he just trust Jean?
Yeah.
And he's like, Cillian is my friend until he proves otherwise.
Right.
And already you're like, what's up with Cillian? So he leaves and he goes to a payphone and he calls his cop friend, but we don't hear that conversation.
He's a friend. He has multiple friends and one is a cop.
Yeah. He seems to have friends in all walks of life.
So then a robbery goes down to rob this house.
It's Maurice and a guy named Remy.
But the police have been tipped off, this guy named Salignari. And Salignari doesn't like spread a lot of the information around. He's just kind of like doing these cases on his own.
Yeah, he doesn't tell the other cops what he's doing.
They bust in on it and Maurice is having to make the escape here. And some dudes get shot, and Salignari gets shot by Maurice.
Yeah, so Remy and Salignari die, and Maurice does this thing where he puts the gun that he shot Salignari with in Remy's hand to try to make it look like they had a shootout. But I love the little bit of detective work. Because they call Maurice in because they figure out that he's somehow tied to this.
Yeah.
or they're asking Cillian about, that's what it is. They're asking Cillian about it because they think that he tipped off Salignari.
Yeah.
And so they're like, we know you give him stuff. And he's like, I do not. I am not a rat. I do not inform.
And Cillian is legitimately upset that Salignari is dead.
Yes.
He says that, like, if I find out who did it, they will die. But he doesn't know that it was Maurice. I mean,
he does at this point.
I guess you could narrow it down quite easily that it was Maurice, even though...
You find out later that he does know. But he and Maurice have been friends longer or just as long.
But he is bummed that Salignari's dead. They were friends.
Absolutely.
And that's why he's there. So when they're interrogating him, that's when you are led to believe that, Cillian is the police informant.
Right. But he says he's not.
Now, before that, in the jumble of all this, Cillian goes back to where Therese and Maurice live.
Right.
And he beats her up, slaps her around, and he ties her up. This is my favorite scene in this whole movie.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that, like, oh, yeah, he's hitting
it's your
this
favorite
woman.
Moment.
But it's actually legitimately funny because when he begins to strike Therese, this music swells, right? And then cuts to him leaning down to a radio on the table. And he turns the music off on the radio.
And then it's so quiet.
And then he ties her up. And then he leaves her. And then we later found out that Therese was put in a car and rolled off a rock quarry.
Yeah.
And she's dead.
He was making her tell him the address where the house was. Now
Therese is almost presented like we get certain women, mainly Therese and Fabienne, the two only women we meet. Fabienne is one that Cillian has. He's like a lost love that he had.
We find out later, yeah.
But Therese she's kind of set up like she's a femme fatale. I'm curious as the French way of, like, they're done up, like they look great. They got that makeup that Amy Winehouse brought back 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And they look kind of stunning, right? But they're also very vacantly expressive. And you think like, oh, Therese is going to be some femme fatale. But no, she's just a lady who's dead. Like right when you think like something's going to ramp up here.
Mm-hmm. Then she's gone.
And it's kind of...
And off screen.
And when we meet Fabienne later, his old love she's in with some kind of gambling guy.
She's dating Nuccello or whatever the fuck his name is, Mr.
Nutescio.
Nutescio.
She has almost the exact same demeanor, very like muted, preserved.
Much so.
Looking stunning, like, but she gives no emotion.
Yeah, she was in the back of the car at the beginning of the movie when the guys showed up at Gilbert's, and we did not know until the movie told us that she was the one in the car that it was really her and not maybe Therese. We were trying to because they look so much alike.
Well, they got the same styles, you know.
Yeah, she had dark hair when we met her later. I swear in the car she had blonde hair, or maybe it was the lighting. It was so confusing because you're right. They have such a style. They're like paper doll cutouts.
Yeah.
It all very much informed to me like what I think of when I think of that style, the kind of like bubble hair and the wing and everything. It's very like Valley of the Dolls.
Yeah.
It was like the American.
That early 60s look. It's starting to change. You see that the style of the time more specifically through the women. These old noir movies, there's always a line of misogyny underneath them. Like that's how it is. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting the way they kind of represent it here, the way the women are. They look cool as shit, but they don't really give anything. Before one even really can do much, she's dead.
The other woman we meet in this is Jean's wife, Anita. When Remy dies, Maurice does actually get shot. And we don't know how. Well, we see Therese's car pull up, and he says her name, and then he passes out. And next time we see him, he is being taken care of by Anita at her and Jean's house. And there's a doctor who's actually a vet who takes care of
right.
these men.
Underworld doctor.
And I love his little joke where the doctor's like picking the bullet out of him. And he says, you know, last time I saw you, I told you that the prison had taken it out of you and you needed iron. I meant spinach. This is not what I meant.
Right.
It's very dad jokes. But it was very cute. And he immediately is like, I'm not going to stay here. I'm leaving. I have to go figure out what's happening. I have to figure out who turned me in, you know, and he thinks it's Cillian.
Yeah, at this point, he does think it's Cillian. We all assume it's Cillian.
they do get Maurice into jail. So they get Maurice and they're questioning him, and they can't get him for the robbery. They're trying to get him for Gilbert's death.
And he is a strong suspect. They got a little more evidence on that.
And he did actually kill him.
He did.
And so the note, he gave Anita a note that said exactly where the jewels and the money and the gun were. And so she gave it to Cillian when Maurice had taken off.
Right.
And so Cillian went and dug all that stuff up. And he goes to Fabian, and he basically is trying to set up an alibi for Maurice that then puts Fabian's shitty boyfriend, Mr.
Yeah, Nuthetio and his buddy, it fingers them for the murder of Gilbert.
Because they went to the house, and he does this thing where he gaslights her a little bit, but she played along, where he was saying to her, don't you remember when you were sitting in the back of that car hearing a gunshot? Think really hard. And
remember when
like,
that train passed, so maybe you didn't hear it right
she
then?
said, a train passed. And he goes, that's it.
Yeah.
You couldn't hear because of the train. And she goes, and he was like, but you don't remember, so it's fine. I'm just going to go. And she's like, no, I remember there was a shot. Like, she desperately wants him. Like, he had just fucked her, too. Like,
oh, we see a little nipple.
Oh, we do.
Month,
I was like, black and white nipples.
It's always jarring when we see a little nudity in a black and white movie. We love it.
The French.
Maybe we should be watching more French noir.
They're not so, I mean, I think it's still Hays Code in the U.S. at this point, but in Europe, they don't give as much of a shit about that kind of stuff. So, which is great. We got to see a topless Fabian for like a fraction of a second.
So Maurice is in jail. There is a really good scene where the cops who are trying to figure it out, like, kind of lay out to Cillian what they think happened with the robbery. But they're off, like, they're wrong. But the one detail that I really appreciated in their detective work is that they said there's no way Remy was alone, because his shirt was pulled up under his armpits as though he'd been caught or carried or lifted by someone else.
This movie has an immense amount of detail to it.
Yes.
Not only detail and description, it really almost lends it to explaining how they would come to these conclusions in a much more specific way. When scenes are done, like there's a scene where Maurice does believe Cillian is in on it at this point, and he's talking to this guy named Kern that we meet in prison. But when Cillian is doing the frame up, and he's doing the job to set up Nuthetio and his buddy, and we see him meticulously doing all these things to make sure that it looks, he wants the jewels and Nuthetio's safe so that they can finger him for the Gilbert stuff, but also Nuthetio's gun has to be hot, so he has to acquire things, and he's killing the guys with each other's weapons, and he's doing it in these specific ways, and when it's all said and done, it's actually so incredibly clever how he pulls it off.
It really, really is. It's really good.
But the scene of all that is very patient, and it sees him cutting in and doing these things and putting these things together and holding.
He's wearing little white gloves.
Everything is so meticulous and takes its time in this movie. The Killing was probably our biggest heist movie this month, but this movie has the meticulous nature almost of a heist movie without technically being one. And I really loved all the attention to details here. So much so that for a lot of this movie, we had to go back, rewatch parts of it, and make sure that we were getting everything lined up just right.
I watched the first half twice.
We really had to kind of study on this one in a way that we didn't have to with the other ones.
One of my favorite moments, which is always my favorite moment in a movie, is when you finally get all the pieces pulled together. And so after Cillian has set up the guys, and he and Maurice and Jean are sitting down in a booth and talking everything out, like what happened, how it happened. And Cillian tells him that the night that he left the apartment and found out like where the deal was going to go down, right? He found out the house. He did call his cop friend, but he didn't tell him anything about
the robbery.
But his cop friend was like, I gotta go, I'm on to something. He was tipped off already. And so then Cillian, by the time he gets there, the shootout's already happened because he was going to try to save his friend because he knew that his cop friend had been tipped off. So he was going to basically try to like diffuse the situation or like get them apart. And so he pulls up right as Maurice passes out in Therese's car.
He's the one that pulled Maurice.
So he pulls Maurice and he takes him to Jean's house and drops him off. He picks up Jean and he's like, we got to go take the fuck care of Therese because now she knows I know this and they're going to. So this is funny. Jean goes, I hope you don't mind. I roughed her up a little bit. So he knocked her unconscious.
No, he said, I hope you don't mind. I had to beat her until she was unconscious.
That's what it was. I beat her until she was
so
unconscious.
Remy is technically the one that killed her, but Jean is technically the one that killed her, but Cillian was an accomplice.
Well, he knocked her unconscious and then they put her in her car and pushed her off a cliff. And they actually show a car going down a cliff. Great shot. It's really great. But so basically, he more apologizes for beating her unconscious than for them actually making sure she dies. But whatever. But Maurice was like, I understand. He just kind of got that. Even though he got so mad at Gilbert for killing Arlette.
But this reveals that Therese was actually the informant.
That's the other thing. Yeah. So he found out he's like, I recognized her because she used to date Sagliari.
Yeah.
That's why he recognized her. We get a scene where he
meets Sagliani. And Sagliani, which he probably shouldn't be doing this, literally says, yeah, she's an informant for us. He straight up says that. So when he goes and meets Therese, he already knows, oh no, shit's fucked up.
Yeah, and she recognizes him too, possibly, and that's why she's like, why do you trust him? She knows he's a bad dude. And he recognizes her, which is why he's like, I gotta beat her up and figure this shit out. And he never makes her say that she told, but he knows. He tells him how he set up
Natheccio.
Cillian stands up and says, listen, guys, I'm gonna fuck off to my house that I built in the country. Fabian is going to join me there. We'll come pick you up for dinner later tonight. We're all going to go out.
Yeah.
He leaves, and then Maurice gets a phone call from Anita.
Yeah.
And Anita says, hey, so-and-so, Kern wants me to tell you that the wreath is going to be delivered today. And then, we didn't even know this happened. This is a flashback.
Well, I immediately knew what was happening. Maurice is hiring, because Maurice thought that Cillian, and we thought it too, is the informant. Maurice pays Kern 20,000 francs to kill Cillian. But in this part, it's a little strange. Maurice should be like, hey, don't go anywhere. I need you to stay here.
Well, he was already gone.
He can stop Cillian because
he chased him. Cillian was in his car and gone when he got the phone call.
He can stop him while he's still there. It's not like he sprinted out the door.
I think he forgot.
He forgot that he hired someone to kill him?
Yeah, because when he got that phone call, he went, oh, God. It was one of these, or he didn't maybe know it was going to happen that day.
Well, Maurice has a jumbled mind. He should have immediately, thought, I'm going to fucking kill this guy accidentally.
He looked shocked. Maybe he didn't know it was going to happen that day. Maybe he thought he had time to call it off. I don't know.
So Maurice is chasing, and he goes in to intercept where it's going to happen.
And real quick, before we get to that, because that's the big climax, the cops come in and arrest Jean because part of his coat had ripped off in the car door. And that was the other thing, too. He's like, I ruined my coat.
So, Jean ends up, they have evidence that Jean killed
So he's going to go to jail.
So Maurice is going to head that off, the murder that he set up. And when he walks into the house, Kern's already there. It mistakes him for Cillian.
I knew that was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen.
And then Cillian is set up, shows up.
Maurice should have gotten there after Cillian, but Cillian stops and goes and sees his horse for a bit, right? So he's having a moment with a horse, and then he goes up to the house, and Maurice has already been shot. Maurice is not dead yet. So Cillian walks in, Maurice says, and then Cillian turns and starts shooting at the screen, and then falls out. Kern, who's been shot a bunch of times, falls on the ground. But Cillian turns his fucking back.
Gets shot right in the back.
And then he is dying, and he makes his way to the phone, and he calls Fabian, and all he says is,
J'aimerais pas ça.
I'm not going to make it.
I'm not going to make it today. And then he dies.
The French.
I thought it would have been funny if Maurice shot up Jean. Just the same way he shot up Gilbert.
Yeah.
Because Gilbert killed his old girlfriend for allegedly being an informant. And I just thought it would have been interestingly consistent if Maurice straight up just plugged Jean right there for killing Therese, even though she was an informant.
He hasn't been with Therese that long. And once he found that out, it feels as though he had it together enough to realize that she probably got up in his life on purpose. You know, I don't know that Arlette was an informant. Maybe he was really in love with Arlette and didn't believe that she had turned him in.
Who's Arlette?
The girl that Gilbert killed. The ex-girlfriend that Gilbert killed.
Oh, right. These names.
I know.
So that's that movie. Le Doulos. We actually thought it was it's a very good
so
movie.
So good, yeah.
And it is our youngest movie we're discussing this month, 1962. And inspired by so much of what we're talking about.
Definitely. Are you ready?
Yeah, 1 through 5 each. Best out of 10. What do you give it?
I'm going to give it a 3.75.
I'm giving it a 4.25.
Okay.
So that makes it a 8. So take a peek at this list. It is sharing the rankings with such classics as, this past year we gave Oppenheimer and Killers of the Flower Moon an 8. So it shares that ranking.
Cillian reminded me of Cillian Murphy a little bit.
The same rating as a movie that probably directly inspired it, Kiss Me Deadly. And also sharing the ranks with movies like House, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. It's at least as good, if not better, than those movies. Though if you did go a little higher on Les Doulos, I would understand. That radio scene alone is very memorable. But that's the show. There's plenty of more noir all month long. We got more tomorrow. Just come right back tomorrow. Check the show notes for links, other places to find us. I have been twitching more. If you want to watch me play Fallout New Vegas, there's a lot of videos to look. But if you follow me on Twitch and then you get that notification that I'm on at like 1 to 2 a.m., and you're up, you can come on and talk to me. I'd love to talk to anyone. But I bet a lot of people who are like, ooh, I want to listen to this guy talk about French New Wave Noir may not have a Twitch account. I get it. Like, subscribe. We like that. We like it when you do that. And comment. We like it when you do that. And any corrections or fun facts. This is our first entry into the Jean-Pierre Melville library, and I'm curious about more. Apparently this guy he's almost like this transition from the classic noir to the more contemporary neo-noir as I look at like clips from his movies and stuff like that. But anyway, that's all. That is it. All right. Damn it. And as I guess like a Jimmy Cagney might say.
Yeah, see?
Turn camera. 102, take 1.
With overlap, action please. Action also please.
He doesn't do anything?
No, sorry, cut. Yeah, rolling.
102, take 2. Ah, the French